Hey guys, it's Matthew here once again, and it is a bit last minute. I know that starter builds should be coming out soon and the league starts very soon, but as always, still have to rate my past league's builds real quick. This is for Heist League. It might help you decide on some other starters or pick some skills, maybe avoid some skills, that sort of thing. So there is still some educational purpose to it. So without further ado, I'm going to get right into it and rate all of my builds for Heist League. A little bit for Flashback and Mayhem and Delve as well. And we start with Hexblast, just regular Hexblast on hit damage. It wasn't Ignite, it wasn't anything fancy, it was just what I thought was sort of the most basic way of building Hexblast when it first came out for the new league. And the idea was that you kind of throw out a curse, build up some doom, and then have a big hit in the end based off of chaos damage that can shatter, shock, that sort of thing. And I mean, it was very much experimental. It was an occultist, and it cleared okay, as you can see throughout the gameplay footage here. It had some okay clear, it could have some area, it had some decent damage for maps and all that. But it is a bit awkward and clumsy in the setup, and it was really bad at single target. Like it felt as though Doom stacking wasn't really working or something. So ultimately, it was a pretty just average build. I did have to go ahead and try and make it work as much as possible. I did kill some Conquerors, Guardians, that sort of stuff, but it was pretty shite for the most part throughout any of that endgame single target. And I think there's a good example here of where it really fell off. There was supposed to be some decent scaling there. I mean, that's not bad for a tier 2 or 3 or some shit Drox, but as the tiers got up, the DPS didn't really ramp, and I think in the end had about 400,000 damage, and then combined with the clunky playstyle meant that it really wasn't terribly worth doing, only if we can get it, you know, much higher DPS, or at least a whole lot less clumsier. So in the end, did end up playing Hexblast Ignite that you'll see just a little bit later, and it was much better. So to give this guy a rating, effectiveness, I don't know, it still cleared alright, but it had pretty bad single target, and it was just lackluster compared to so many other starters you could have chosen. I'm still going to give it maybe a 5, because it did clear pretty well, and I wasn't sad about how I was mapping, I think. Enjoyment, I mean, I always have fun playing a new character, a new build, trying to figure things out, so it was fun on that scale, but if you take all of that away, we probably have to give that a fucking 3. It's not very enjoyable having to wait for the doom, having to put out curses, having to just constantly reapply with your Hexblast. And can it be a starter? I mean, it had no freaking currency whatsoever, and it did get us going up to, you know, mid-tier maps and all that. So fair enough, it can be a starter, but it just, you know, bang for buck wasn't super effective. So I'm going to give that a 6 as well. May even be the lowest rating I've ever given something in total. I think that's a 14. Pretty sad stuff. If we go to the next build, it is Crackling Lance Inquisitor, I believe. So also a new skill, and I was trying this one out as a second character, as opposed to just playing it for the first time, because I thought Crackling Lance would benefit from having a little bit of gear, so that you could get your cast speed rolling, so that you could get appropriate stacks of Crackling Lance intensify as you needed them, as you wanted them. And overall, I thought it worked pretty well. I actually was pretty pleased with the character. It could have used more gear. It could have been even beefier. I think few people had success with it. Like prior to my build, few people had success with Crackling Lance. Not too many people even had success when trying out Crackling Lance after my build as well. So that said, it's probably just a bit too weak, and it is getting a slight buff of like 30% damage or some shit, which is pretty damn good. But I think it mostly needs some more built-in thickness on the laser beam in the end, or the cast speed, or some shit like that. But overall, I thought it was a pretty nice build, and Crackling Lance is definitely something I wouldn't mind trying out a second time. And Inquisitor has been revamped a bit, and there might be some good fun stuff for Inquisitor in there. With Crackling Lance, I feel maybe, you know, have some good shield charge action, build up some fanaticism, and then have really fast attack speed. It is a little bit gear dependent though, because you probably want to call the Brotherhood, you probably want some really good cast speed shit. And if we can see an example of single target somewhere maybe, then you can see that it is something, especially as an Inquisitor. It does end up getting somewhere. The main drawback, I suppose, is probably just the real standstill nature of it, especially once you've got your intensify stacks going. You are heavily vulnerable just standing there. So it's a very kill or be killed situation. Doesn't lend itself very well to HC, I don't think. Maybe one more little boss example here, just to check it out. That's already a pretty high tier map as well, so not too bad. I think it was a 5-link by the end of the entire character's playthrough. So I think Crackling Lance, if you're interested, definitely worth another look this league. Maybe you could try it as an Elementalist, otherwise probably slate it for a second character still so you can have a bit of gear. So if we're going to then judge our character here, effectiveness, I think it was pretty decent. Give it a 7 enjoyment. I had a lot of fun with it. I'll give it an 8. Can't be a starter. It probably could, but you're better off waiting for a little bit of gear just so you can truly feel good with your standstill phases and your cast speed and all of that. So I'd still give that maybe a 6. If we combine all of that, it's a pretty healthy 21. The next character is going to be a bit of a struggle to watch the video of because it has horrendous bitrate and it was pure meme action. It was testing alternate qualities from Heist for the first real time. And trying to push them to the limits, and it was Kinetic Bolt with a whole bunch of cast speed that then gets converted to attack speed, and it gives you some serious attack speed on a Kinetic Bolt character that can be pretty good for clear. It had some very solid clear. It was pretty fun to sort of go through this build process and figuring out the character, and pretty fun to map with, and the single target wasn't anything special. That's kind of just Kinetic Bolt's you know, MO. It's never, I don't think, gonna have very good single target unless you really properly overgear some shit. And then you could do some pretty cool little alt effects for it as well. Bitrate was completely horrible, but it is rather pretty on my screen. And was it a build anyone should have ever copied? No, not really. But you could have definitely looked into some mechanics like this with the Kinetic Bolt. Alt quality, stacking cast speed, maybe do more of a strength stack or some shit like that with poison. Who the hell knows? But this was my humble attempt at it, and it was, yeah, like I said, pretty much just pure meme. Do I even have a single target example on this video? Probably not, because there wasn't any, and it was in the second video. Just a little bit here, I suppose. Hey, not too bad for a 77 hideout, but it was gear dependent. It was you know, expensive to put together. It was hard to put together, and ultimately not very worthwhile. So the effectiveness of it, yeah, look, it had really good map clear, but pretty mediocre single target. Once again, probably similar to that, about a 7 enjoyment. It was fun putting together. Wasn't super fun to play for endgame, but was fun to map with. I think that can still be a 7. And the budget, can it be a starter? I'm pretty sure it can't. I'm pretty sure it cost a lot, and it needed a lot of specific things. We'll give that a 3. So with all that combined, 14, 17, I believe. Not the worst rating for it, but yeah, it was just a bit of a meme test, trial of memes, some shit like that. After that, we did 5-link double strike, and that was using the replica tempestuous steel weapons. It was once again a bit of a meme, but it had some solid, you know, framework in that double strike is quite insane by itself, and the tempestuous steels had a lot of crit multi, a lot of extra fun stuff to go with them. So the idea was to be a slayer. The idea was to then scale flat fears through the double strike gem and some abyssus and slayer crit and all of that, and get a lot of damage, even though the weapons themselves had complete garbage damage. Now there is currently a bug fix that says bleeding from double strike now appropriately applies the added physical damage, implying that this didn't have added fizz from the double strike, which means this build would have twice as much damage. I don't know if that's strictly correct. For a lot of my boss fights, it looked like I had several million DPS, whereas if we assume it's bugged, the character had about 2 million DPS at most. So I'm not quite sure. But if it was bugged, then holy shit, this character is actually really legit. Because twice its current damage basically is huge, and the entire cornerstone of how I was trying to build it around the bleed double strike wasn't working. So tempestuous steel, they're pretty easy to come by. Replica tempestuous, sorry. Don't know quite how available they're going to be in the future for Heist throughout the Ritual League, but you can see with the double strike, with the Vile double strike, you can do some pretty dirty single target damage. We do also die because I just don't move for that. I didn't know it did damage, my bad. But yeah, overall it was a pretty solid character. It wasn't super expensive, and hopefully if it now has way more damage thanks to being bugged, it's actually quite a contender. That said, double strike, always a winner. You can play it with just about anything right now, and it should be a good starter for no gear, some gear, pretty much any weapons, any ascendancies. It's just really good. I do still thoroughly believe in double strike and Vile double strike, aka the boys. So we give that an effectiveness. It was pretty effective, though it could have been a little bit better. Maybe if it was not bugged, it could have been a lot higher. The enjoyment of it, I do love me some double strike. I liked putting together meme weapons for this thing, so I'm going to give that also an 8. Can it be a starter? I mean, I don't know how you're going to get replica tempestuous steels early on, if they're accessible, if going to be easy, but you can do just about any other sort of double strike weapon with this as well. But just because of the tempestuous steel thing, we're going to call it kind of a 6, which puts it at a 22. Pretty decent rating for that build. We then move on to cast on crit pathfinder with bow using double ice spear, so 2 different ice spear setups, and blazing salvo. Now I have done several cast on crit bow characters in similar sorts of fashion. This is just another attempt. You're trying to use blazing salvo and some ice spear, and I'm not going to lie, I can't really fucking remember the thing until I watched the video. So it didn't leave a huge impact, wasn't super memorable. Now that I'm watching it and went over it just a little bit already, it I think had really good clear. It was kind of satisfying to play, and then single target needed to do more for how much it took to put together and how kind of squishy it is when standing still and doing all of your damage and stuff. But in theory, in concept, it was pretty sound, and it was fairly fun to put together and play ultimately. But it just, needed a bit more oomph for a cast on crit bow character to really be worth doing, I think. From memory anyway, but it was rather fun, and I do enjoy just about every cast on crit bow character I do. As you can see, it's a nice splooge fest, nice satisfying clear and all that. And for single target, as a quick example, it wasn't anything huge, and like I said, it was just a bit too much standing still. So that's decent single target, but letting a Baron get off like 4 or 5 attacks while being in pretty high danger of dying to them isn't great. For how complicated it was to put together something like a cast on crit bow pathfinder. But yeah, you can see it's not too bad. So it was something you could build, something you could play, but probably not highly worth doing. And then Cirrus, quick example of how it looked when he first comes down, especially compared to the blade flurry that I just then did, which absolutely shit on him. Yeah, not the best. It will take a little bit longer. I think straight after this, when it comes back around, it'll be solid enough. Blow some cooldowns. Nearly die, because like I said, a bit squishy on it. And I'm pretty sure it's still only like Awakening 5 or some shit. So yeah, not the best, but decent enough. Effectiveness, give it a 7. Single target, definitely let it down. And the ultimate, danger of the way the playstyle is in single target. The enjoyment, that's also probably a 7. I had fun with it. Like I said, I had fun with most of them, but it definitely didn't stand out to be any sort of huge build. And can it be a starter? No. No, it can't. It's probably going to take a good, decent bit of gear and all of that shit. Give that a 3. God knows why. Give that a 2. Because no, you're not starting it. 16, hey, pretty bad rating. We then do move into what was and probably is build of the freaking league. It's the one I was referring people to all league long if they asked what my favorite build was or what my best build was. And I could have picked some other things later on to the league as, you know, answers, but it's just such a staple of a character that I don't think I needed to think about it ever again. And it was just plain poison, strength stacking, Alberon assassin. Now, a large part of that is that Alberon chaos stacking with strength was just busted. Like, the numbers for it were just way too good. You could pick anything with poison, attack, viability, strength stack, and then just have a really good, solid character. You'd get a lot of life, good survivability, really good damage, and it didn't cost too much to put together. So ultimately, I think they were just a bit out of line. They did get nerfed. Assassin got a little bit nerfed, but both things aren't 100% relevant, since you'll still be able to build a character like this without too much effort and still get a lot out of it. So it uses Kinetic Blast for clear, it uses Power Siphon with Barrage for single target, and it ended up just being an absolute monster of a character. Like I said, could have done just about anything, but I went for a more hipster route to just be a bit different to most other people playing this type of shit, and it was wands as opposed to something like bows, Cobra Lash, whatever the hell, but you could have done just about anything. I don't know if we have a small single target. There is a lot of ramping, as you could see though, in the fact that you get your wither totems down and then have to attack quite profusely with your barrage. But once that ramp is up, I think we're rolling with, I don't know, 10, 15 million DPS from memory. So it was an absolutely ridiculous character. I'm gonna have to give it some serious business ratings. Effectiveness, it's a 10. Couldn't get more effective. It was really good for clear, really good for single target. It did have a bit of ramp, I suppose, which, you know, maybe some people don't like and means we didn't instantly kill everything, but it was a 10 effectiveness. Enjoyment, I really enjoyed it. I'm gonna have to give that I'll give it a 9 because, I don't know, maybe there could have just been a little bit more flashy things happening. It was ultimately missing a few explosions, since it was just Kinetic Blast melting through things. Explosions would have been a 10, I suppose. Budget, can it be a starter? If you can get some Alberons, yeah. It's not too hard to get Alberons. Don't know how hard it is with the heist and all that, but gear and everything, it's pretty simple. It's pretty easy to do. I'll still give it, you know, budget, it's low, so we'll give it a high rank for that. Don't know if you can purely start with something like this, especially this time around, with, you know, heist being a bit more late game. And also the fact that it got slightly nerfed for attack speed, movement speed on Assassin, but it is still very much playable and very much a complete build you can do. Give it a 28. That's probably going to be build of the league, as I mentioned. We then do something, once again, extremely meme, and as is the story with most things that are very meme, they have decent clear, they can do some things and be fun, but then they have really sort of average single target and bossing capabilities. And it is a Doryani fist, but with some ignite action using a whole bunch of mana stack. And it was, yeah, I mean, it was something. It was pretty satisfying gameplay for clear. It was pretty, you know, hipster, extremely different. We were using Fist of War, as you can see, so that makes Doryani's look quite cool. And mana stack, one of the first times I was really mana stacking as sort of a viable option, and it could clear maps, it could survive some shit. It was kind of awkward to play with the slow attack time, but it was satisfying to have those really large burns. It didn't really translate to really large burns quite as nicely for a single target, because I mean, ignite single target is usually pretty mediocre unless you're using some real meta ignite sort of stuff. But yeah, I mean, it wasn't a terrible choice to do. I just didn't think anyone should have really copied it in the end. Sort of just a proof of concept type of build. So if we see what it looks like on single target here, it was not the best, and it does take, you know, one perfect wind up for your exact best DPS, which is probably the most annoying part about it. You needed to time all your attacks and hits just right. And then you can see it would sometimes do some burn damage. Sometimes. Here we go. It's happening. Any second now. Here comes the burn. Hey, there you go. But yeah, like essentially we line up all our attacks, get the single biggest burn happening, and if it doesn't work out, then you're kind of just stuck trying to fish for another burn, and it wasn't that good because of that. But, I don't know, decent enough either way, just as a proof of concept build. Don't regret playing it, just you probably should never do it yourself. Effectiveness, cleared well, single target sucked, give it a 6. Enjoyment, sometimes yes, a lot of the time no. Wasn't too easy to put together. I'll give it like a 5. Budget, can it be a starter? No. Wouldn't really recommend doing it ever again either. Oh god, that's a low rating. Have a 13. Hell yeah. Gotta have some really bad builds, huh? And speaking of really bad builds, not this one. It was actually pretty damn solid. It was basically the definition of glass cannon and the definition of a softcore playstyle and build. And it was trying to make use of the freshly buffed discharge as self-cast, and you could get some serious business discharge going for a lot of damage, a lot of area, and ultimately, yeah, a lot of viability, I suppose. It was suffering from a bit of, single target problems as well if you didn't purely destroy something in that one first hit. But this was like a double beyond sextanted crazy as shit map by that point, as crazy as I could do it. And I was just running around one tapping screens and double screens, and it was pretty crazy. Like, it was fairly gear intensive in the end because I did try my best to make it as much of a viable thing as possible. It was extremely PC heavy because, as you can see, large amounts of graphics and stuff going into this one, and it was lighting up my room every single time I discharge, and it was viable, ultimately. It was a bit uncomfortable having to, make sure you'd be positioned perfectly, have all your charges, and sometimes it would whiff, and it was, squishy in the end, because if you got hit, if things got the hit in before you, we didn't have much of a defense base or life pool to counter that. But is what it is, and it still worked. If you kill everything before it kills you, it works, and it got to pretty high levels. It is the natural Path of Exile playstyle of kill before something kills you, and that a lot of the time works just fine. It's just probably a bit too hard to recreate, put together, I think, to a certain level of viability as well, because you can't really do it off of low damage and being halfway there. So that was what probably makes it the more difficult side of things to give it really high ratings. See if I've got any boss damage happening. I guess it was my first Uber Elder for the league, and yeah, it worked out, I think, because I don't really fail in Uber Elder, as far as I can remember. Some decent DPS, pretty much one tap in the phases. Overall, I do think it was effective, or as effective as it possibly could have been. So effectiveness, give it an 8. Still a bit clumsy to set up, something like that. Enjoyment, it was pretty damn fun, give it a 9. Budget, it was high, I'd say, but not impossible to get going in early stages, maybe a 4. It was pretty, decent example of what a self-cast discharge could do, one that wasn't ignite based. Give it, a 21 in total. Next up is a build that I don't remember too much about until, seeing this again, but that's because I did have another couple of goes at Lancing Steel in like solo self-found and all that, and it is the Lancing Steel Deadeye, which was a real surprise package of a character. I didn't expect it to be quite as potent as it was in the end, just through sheer defensiveness as well as offensiveness and enjoyment. So Lancing Steel had a bit of a rework with some Call of Steel action, I think, and then using a savior. As you could see, we have a lot of these additional projectiles, and it was just based off of Impale, Deadeye, Chain, I think, and ultimately it, with enough life gain on hit, let you just ignore mechanics. And it had really good clear speed, had fast sort of character playstyle, had decent, pretty damn good single target even, and then you could be thick enough and just ignore mechanics thanks to the life gain on hit, and just stand there face tanking a lot of things. The one problem would be that it was fairly gear intensive. You need a savior, I think. I did say you didn't need a savior, and it is fine without a savior, true enough, but savior makes it so much nicer to play with, having those 2 extra clones doing a bunch of extra projectiles as well. It does become a bit of a visual mess and clutter, and I was doing some delirium maps and high tier maps and everything, and it was working out pretty well. And as you can see, it becomes a visual clutter in the end with using, I think it was Sniper's Mark, projectile weakness, something like that. But it worked well. You could ignore shit, you could do some good single target, and it was a build I could have comfortably said that other people can copy and replicate. It's not super hard to replicate, but it was a little bit gear intensive. You did need the right items, I think, to make it truly fun and worthwhile build. But very, very good overall. Give it a 9 for effectiveness. Could have had a bit more single target still. But yeah, it couldn't have got much better, to be honest. Enjoyment, I'd give that a 9 as well. It was pretty damn good. Budget, it can't really be a starter, but it wasn't super expensive. It was just kind of hard to put some of the things together, and it is still doable off of a lower budget and maybe even SSF. Not quite sure how the new Deadeye fits in with it. Possibly still works well, but it's not too bad, I think. So give it a 9, 18, and 23. Pretty solid build overall, honestly. Maybe deserves a bit higher than that, but can't really give it to it. We then have another build I kind of forgot about because I think it's just been a very long league, you know. But it is a cast on crit, detonate, dead assassin. I have played cast on crit, detonate, dead a couple times, but this time, once again, going fully into memes. I was going poison with the anomalous detonate, dead, I think it was, alt quality that made, with a bit of effort, we made our fire damage basically 100%. Chaos. So instead of doing any fire damage, we based all of our build off of chaos and then went heavy into poison, and it was actually a very, very effective build in the end. It cleared all content easily. It was doing my high tier full delirium maps. It did like insane DPS. I don't know exactly how much, but millions and millions, and was doing pretty clean single target against things like Osiris. It was pretty hard to put together though. It's cast on crit, it's, you know, cyclone, melee, using the anomalous gem, and it was also CI, so you know you needed energy shield for it. So that was what made it kind of difficult. And then the ramp was, you know, something as well, something to consider. You had to spin for a good little bit, and then you'd have insane damage going off, as you could see right around there. Similar to that in Cirrus, or we can have a quick look at the Metamorph as well. It had really good clear, it had really good single target, there was a bit of ramp involved, and it was fairly costly to put together, but it was a super effective character, and one that was, you know, full of memes. A more conventional, just regular cast on crit, detonate dead without poison still works quite nicely if you're really into this sort of playstyle and thing, and I've got past videos of those being quite effective and going off. Still a little hard to put together as a starter build, but as a fire version, it is definitely doable, and Assassin's going to lose a bit of its movement speed here, so that's a bit unfortunate. But a very good character overall. We're going to have to give that an effectiveness of just about 10, I think, because it had very good clear, very good single target, and did some of the content plenty of my other characters never could, like full-blown delirium map Alva clears. Enjoyment, I'd give that a 9. It was just real difficult to put together. This one in particular with CI and all that, it's not happening, but given that the alternate fire version can happen, still give it a couple of points, so give that a 3. Though it honestly, you know, could be a lot higher as a total because it was such an insane build overall. I then built into what was a pretty hipster version of Sweep. It was trying to utilize one of the new experimental base types from Heist, which was ignore Ellie resists of enemies on crit. So it's basically Inquisitor as a just weapon type, and it was pretty crazy. It was Sweep, Berserker, so I did make it do as much damage as possible so that you're one-shotting things, gave it a good amount of attack speed, and a huge amount of Well, shit, I just said damage, right? Damage again. Even more damage. Area, I think is what I was trying to say. So the idea for these sweep type builds is that you want to have basic screen coverage, basically one sweep for one entire screen kill. And as you can see, it was pretty effective. It was doing good damage. I think it ended up doing several million. It was one-shotting most things. Little bit squishy given that, you know, berserker, bit of abyssus action, stuff like that. But I don't think that was ever a real issue, especially with, you know, berserk being popped, using rage and all of that. So it was pretty clean and a little bit gear intensive as well. Overall, a very nice example of a sweep build, and you could just copy more of a Void Forge sweep if you want to do it a bit more simplistic and still have a very nice sweep character that doesn't rely on a pretty thick weapon. So I think I did make a rather nice weapon for this one in the end as well. I'll have a quick example of a single target, I suppose, just so that I can see what it did. But it was gear heavy and it wasn't supposed to be cheap, but it was very effective and it was pretty fun to play. Could have done a bit more single target by the looks of it. It wasn't the best or anything. Just another quick Cirrus example here. See what we were doing. I don't press any flasks for Cirrus first few phases, so it's never huge. That's not too bad, honestly. So yeah, pretty decent build. Just a nice hipster version of sweep. So effectiveness, give it an 8. Could have had a bit more single target, a bit more defense, but I had to sacrifice some of that for more damage and all that. Enjoyment, I did enjoy that as well, but certainly not the best or the most fun thing ever. Budget, can it be a starter? No, but if you did more of a fizz, or it'd be a lot cheaper if you did a Void Forge, definitely can't be a starter at that point. Still, it's not that bad. It's kind of bad. Give it a 4. So overall, a 20. It was a pretty solid build, so can't be rated too low, I don't think. Nuclear Zombies was the next one, and this one is a recreation of my sort of popcorn skeletons. So instead of going with lots of skellies that explode, we went with simply sort of one big zombie hit at a time that would also ignite, and that would also leave some burn damage on the ground. And it worked out pretty well. It was a decent example of a character that is really kind of hipster as well, really meme, but kind of works out with the right circumstances. And it was pretty uncomfortable to play from what I remember, but it had some decent burn, some decent single target, and overall some solid effectiveness. I think it was pretty hard to put together just in terms of pure like what items you needed, so it's not going to be easy off of a new league. It's certainly not going to be easy within the first week or something, I don't think. But it was effective enough, and it was a good example of something different to the popcorn skellies, just taking a similar concept, but then rolling with zombies instead of skeletons. I think popcorn skeletons overall is still a much better build, more effective. The single target on this one did end up just falling off, and the ignite wasn't really doing anything. The ignite was only doing things during clear phase. So going to lose some points for that for sure. Effectiveness, I'll give it like a 7. Decent clear, kind of average single target, but it was hard to kind of play, so enjoyment on that level as well, maybe a 6. It was fun to put together, but kind of uncomfortable to play. And then budget, can it be a starter? Nah, not really. Got to give that like a 3. So that's in total a 16. Next up was a character I went pretty all in on once again to try and, you know, proof of concept, make it work, and that was Elemental Earthshatter and crit version. You know, typical Earthshatters are non-crit, they're typically fizz, stuff like that, using Impale. This was supposed to be a raider that used an axe with high crit, Abyssus, I think, Replica Abyssus. I finally wanted to use one of those, stacking a bunch of flat elemental damage, and then running around really quickly, raidering, shattering, and it was pretty damn effective. It was a really fast character, it had really strong single target, bit clumsy to play, as most Earth Shatters are. You got to rotate between like war cries and shit, but it was actually just kind of a real thing of beauty. It's going to be hard to put together, it's going to be hard to ever replicate, since it was using some pretty thick gear here or there, but it was a nice proof of concept and something that, you know, might be worth looking into in the future if you're a fan of this sort of playstyle, damage, and meme. That said, Earthshatter did take a bit of a hit for single target, so maybe it won't be quite as good as it currently was here, and it was a bit of a weird cluster of a setup to, you know, get the right Warcries and then Earthshatter and then make the best use of your damage, given that a lot of bosses do already not get hit by a lot of the spikes from Earthshatter as it stands. But it can be good. It is a bit just high roll, bit hit or miss. Clear was really nice, really fun, but the boss phases themselves probably weren't the easiest or the best on this type of a character. So it's got to lose some points for effectiveness there. Do we get to see some proper damage against Cirrus maybe? It's not terrible for what it was. In any case, yeah, we'll give it a bit of a rating. In this case, Ellie Earthshatter effectiveness, really good for clear, pretty okay for single target, but just depends highly on the boss. Enjoyment, I did have a lot of fun playing it. I'd give it a 9. Budget, doable, hard to replicate, definitely not something you're starting with. Give that a 4. So in total, we're looking at, I'm not good at this, 21. We then have Blade Flurry Inquisitor, which was potentially the strongest build I played all league. It, you know, would be in close contention with the Poison Wander, I think, most likely. Because they both had pretty damn good clear, both had pretty damn good single target, but this was a lot more front-loaded damage as opposed to on, you know, some ramping on the back end. And on top of that, it was a lot squishier, but it could afford to be a lot squishier because you don't really ever get hit by anything. And the clear was just insane with the freeze and the shattering. So Pulverize carried that hard. It was pretty gear intensive, so it was quite a bit more expensive than the Wander, for example, or at least just baseline entry level would be quite a bit more expensive. You can see double beyond like high tier maps and stuff just getting shredded, but you can also see examples of some pretty insane single target damage where Blade Flurry is still pretty much king. It manages to still, I think, possibly be the best single target that I could think of anyway, without using other types of summons, traps, mines, that sort of shit. Maybe I've got the Cirrus here somewhere. Oh yeah, here it is. So it's just a lot more front-loaded damage compared to the Wander, though overall they're both at pretty much the same level of effectiveness. Hard to really say one's more effective than the other. It's just, you know, do you prefer to kill things instantly and be a bit more squishy, or be a bit tankier but then have more of a wind-up time? But there's definitely a price difference and sort of a fun difference as well. Effectiveness, they're both damn near 10 at the very end. Enjoyment, Blade Flurry Inquisitor, still pretty damn good. Budget, can it be a starter? Budget's high, but you can build into lower versions of this. I don't know, probably give it a 5 or something. Point is that it was pretty much equally tied with the Poison Assassin for, you know, strength of build for the league. We'll even give that a 9 just to bring it up a smidge. So that's going to be a 24 in the end. I then move into builds that weren't from the sort of Heist League anymore, and the Flashback, Mayhem, Delve, something like that, just special event ones. And we'll go with, Hexblast Ignite. So this was, I think, just a much better way of playing Hexblast in the end. This was on HCSSF, so it was a lot harder to build, gear requirements and also defensive requirement and all of that. And yet it ended up being just a much better build than the previous Hexblast that I tried. And it was actually a really nice starter because it started off of like basically 0 gear, and it just had really good clear, decent single target. Nothing mind-blowing, it's Ignite still after all, but it was solid enough for what it was trying to accomplish. It was on hardcore, so I did have to build a bit more defense than usual, but the idea was mana stack with Archmage, and then have your Hexblast do lightning damage, but it's still going to ignite off of that damage, and then you've also got elemental equilibrium, elemental overload, and it was I was very happy with it. If it wasn't for plenty of other things changing in the new league, I would happily start with this guy again as a starter. Might even recommend it as a starter, still thinking about it, because Flame Wall by itself kind of carries for a long time, and it was just a thoroughly enjoyable build. I don't know if there's any single target examples, because like I said, it wasn't huge, but it was adequate, and it is a bit of a setup to it still. You got to make sure that your elemental overload is up, you got your brand hitting the enemy, but it's defensive enough that you can run around and just take your time with the damage. And obviously you get much better damage in a trade league and playing it as a softcore character. And then on top of that, Hexblast was buffed quite a bit. The actual damage that it starts out with is up by like 300 or some shit. Damage effectiveness, so the damage that 300, 30%. The damage that your Archmage applies to it will also be buffed. Overall, it will be just a stronger character, and I think it's, pretty worth a start if you're still kind of wondering about a league starter and wanted to try out some Hexblast action. Look at that. Top tier deeps. So it's going to be a bit faster. You're not going to be SSF. You're not going to be on hardcore, I assume. But it was, taking things down quite comfortably in the Flashback League before it got snuffed out at some point anyway. Effectiveness, I'm going to give it like an 8, even though it wasn't the fastest, wasn't the best. It was overall pretty damn effective. Enjoyment, I did thoroughly enjoy it. Can it be a starter? It definitely can. Still, probably need a few things to be properly enjoyable, like a 6-link, tabular. 24 ain't too shabby. The next one we'll go for is Gladiator Bleed Earthquake. That was during the Delve League, and it was, let's find it here, a pretty damn good build for the entire Delve event. It took me down to like depth 500 or something, I can't quite remember. It was my main delver in the end, just non-stop delving, and it got me there quickly. And it's just a pretty basic, I think anyway, Gladiator Earthquake, big two-handed weapon. I think it was a mace, can't remember. And then run around, Earthquake, bleed things, use war cries, and it was just pretty dirty damage with the bleed action. And Val Earthquake makes it pretty damn fast. In the new league, Gladiator's getting just a slight nerf on its bleed damage, but that's not really going to change anything here. Very comfortably a starter build, and a very overall effective build. I'm not quite sure it's going to have the best single target in the end, because I never really got to experience any of that. But with the right amount of gear, Bleed Earthquake, Gladiator can have single target if you build it that way. So for that one, we'll give it an effectiveness of an 8. Enjoyment, I did have quite a lot of fun with it. Can it be a starter? You know what? That's also a pretty good 8. Give it a 24. I did then run a, once again, hardcore based flashback. Solo self-found Chieftain that used a really cheap mace, the Panguatzalitsi, I think it's what it's called. Just a big explosion mace, and it was based around Tectonic Slam. But as you can see, huge area, pretty decent clear speed, really slow attacks, and just big explosions. It was really cheap to put together, pretty effective, pretty tanky, like solid, thick sort of character, and then eventually it's going to run out of single target DPS. So it's a really nice starter, it's a really nice character that can get you through content, and the playstyle's okay if you're into the big slow hits that clear like an entire freaking screen, but it's definitely going to run out of steam, and for endgame single target, it's going to be pretty thin, because I think it ends up hitting for like, I don't know, 400k a hit or some shit like that at its absolute top end, and that's just not enough for the proper end game single target, I don't think. I don't know if I've got any good examples of actual single target, because this character didn't really do single target fights. I think it got to Katarina. It did actually a few single target fights. It got to Katarina and then died there, so I didn't get to really test it too much in that front. But I'm fairly confident it would have been amazing for that. So get you to mid-tier maps, so definitely start you off, but you'll be looking to reroll a second character within, a week. Depends on how fast you're playing and all of that. Effectiveness, give it a 7. It cleared well. It single targeted bad. Enjoyment, give it another 7. It really depends if you like the slow hits and the war cries and all that. Can it be a starter? It definitely can. Give that an 8 because it benefits off of gear, and the mace that I was built around, you won't get to like level 60 or so. But it's overall pretty damn nice, as most of these HCSSF sort of just well-rounded builds are. So we're looking at 1422. And then last build for the entire thing was this Debeon Dirge Slayer. It was once again still HCSSF, just building around what I had, and in this case it was a Debeon Dirge, and I was trying to make it crit based, pure Ellie, so similar to how the Raider performed, just pure Ellie, crit base, but as a Slayer and on HC with just whatever gear I had on file. Using Bladestorm, so Bladestorm's pretty damn nice for this. Do I not have better quality? Just nice bitrate, I guess. Bladestorm was pretty nice overall for all the content. I do thoroughly rate Bladestorm as a skill, so if you want to look into that just overall as a thing, not necessarily this build or anything, then it's pretty worth playing and checking out. Just as an Impale version, as other Ellie versions, it's a very strong skill. I don't think the character went too far, but it definitely can. You can see other examples of Bladestorm on like Void Forge. Debeon's Dirge, kind of just a meme, I think, still. It will ultimately get outscaled by plenty of other things. It was just a cheap budget sort of thing to start with. Fun though, just because I really like Bladestorm and with the MTX, but it's going to have to take some points down for like effectiveness and all that sort of shit. So we'll sum it up with an effectiveness of decent clear, decent single target, but nothing too insane. Give it a 7. Enjoyment, I did mostly enjoy it, but could have been a bit more fun. Just still HCSSF, trying to make the best of the situation. Can it be a starter? It can. It's decent. It's okay, but it won't take you that far because it is Debeon's Dirge, some shit like that. 766, I think that's an okay rating for that one, and give it a total of 19. All in all, that is about it for that. Sorry for the long video as always, but each build needs a good 2 to 3 minutes, and we do usually play about 20 builds a league. Let me get back into a bit more personal situation. Plenty of those can be things that you can try out in the new league. Plenty of those can be starters. And Harvest potentially will make a lot of the gear for many of the characters a lot easier to make. We'll have to wait and see on that front. But I'll hopefully have the starter build video up for you quite soon, next 12 to 24 hours, something like that. Still a lot of work, still got to put together a couple of builds, but I don't expect it to be anything too mind-blowing. I mean, you shouldn't expect it to be anything too mind-blowing. Maybe some builds from previous stuff, Cobra Lash, that sort of thing. But for now, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the new league.